Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with my admissions colleague, Zoe Mayfield Boykin. Our new Executive MBA and part-time MBA applications are now live, and Zoe and I recently connected to talk more about our deadlines, updates to this year's application, tips for applicants targeting our Executive MBA and part-time MBA programs, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to the ExecMBA podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with my admissions colleague, Zoe Mayfield Boykin. Zoe, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Brett. Thanks for having me back.
Well, it's great to have you on the show again. How's everything going? How are you doing?
Things are going well. It is sunny outside, warm, August here. Recording live here from Charlottesville.
And when we record these, we're typically both in Roslyn, and yet here we are in Charlottesville. It's launch week. It's the first week of school for our full-time MBA, part-time MBA, and executive MBA students. What do you think about this week? How are you feeling?
I think launch week is fantastic. You know, it's really an exciting time. It's the official start of school for all of our Darden students, including our professional degree program students, part-time and executive MBA. And so it's just great seeing everyone jump in, get started, and launching a new school year.
Yeah, I'm always a little bit nervous for the first day of school, even though I'm not actually going to school. But there's always just a sense of anticipation, right? You're excited for the students, you're excited for people to get to know each other. But there's always like that moment right before everybody shows up. You're like, man, we spent all this time recruiting this class. You know, I'm excited for them to embark upon this journey, but it's a real like swirl of emotions. I don't know how you felt yesterday, but that's how I always feel before like the welcome speech. I'm excited for everyone, and just kind of that sense of anticipation.
Just goes to show the first day jitters don't go away once you're out of elementary, high school, even college. Graduate school has first day jitters, even if on the admission side too.
Absolutely. The thing that I also think about though is the arc just in this 1 week that students go through with their learning team, with their classmates, just beginning to form relationships. First day or so, people are just kind of getting warmed up to it. But by the time you get to Thursday or Friday, you start to see friendships forming, groups of friends coming together. It's amazing how much people can accomplish in this fairly compressed amount of time.
It really serves as like the foundation of the community that we talk about a lot here at Darden. You know, like you said, those friendships are starting to be formed. Students are having their first cases that they're tackling with their learning teams in the evening, first case method classes during the day. So it's really just exciting to see it all come together.
Yeah, the academic piece, I think the thing that I always try to remind students about at this point in the process is to be patient with themselves, because I think there is a real desire, and I think this comes from the kind of people who are attracted to doing an MBA, right? Highly motivated, talented, capable people, not used to being in this kind of situation where they don't know exactly what they're doing all the time. And so there's a tendency for folks to try to get ahead of like, I got to figure out how to do this case method thing. I got to figure out how to, and you have to accept that's kind of a process, and it can be a little bit slow. Like you go from one class, you go to one class and you get some feedback like, oh, I didn't see that. And I didn't see that. And next time I read, I'm going to look for these other things. And you go to the second class and you continue to refine. But that may be a different timeline than what people have in mind in the back of their head as they think about adjusting to the academic experience here.
Sure, it's certainly a learning curve, but I always try to encourage students, particularly this week, that it's one that you'll go up quickly. And by the time you return to Charlottesville, you'll be an old pro, and it will feel, it will feel like riding a bike. You've been doing it for years.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I always try to encourage students as they come to this first week of school is if you can, do your reading in advance so that you can just come to this week, you know, have the space and time to get to know your classmates, to do things socially in the evening. So you're not having to run back to the hotel room and read the case for the first time. Maybe you're brushing up a little bit in the evenings or kind of getting together with your learning team, having maybe a conversation about what you expect to happen. But if you can give yourself the space to really enjoy being in Charlottesville and kind of soak it all in, I think that's the best way to go through this week.
Completely agree.
Well, we have two new classes, a new executive MBA class, new part-time MBA class. We welcomed 132 executive MBA students, 76 part-time MBA students. They are well into their first week of school now, as mentioned. What would you want to highlight? What's one of the things that you would want to share with folks about these classes?
Yeah, so right off the bat, I'm always just struck by the multitude of professional experiences and academic backgrounds that our students are coming from. So for example, the Executive MBA class of 2027, this group is made up of students with 55 unique undergraduate majors, which is just incredible, and 98 unique employers. And so you really start to understand. We always get that question from prospective students. Many of these students who are now current students saying, "I don't have a traditional business background." Is that something that's going to be a problem? And you see from these 55 academic undergraduate majors, no, it's not a problem. We have students from all sorts of academic backgrounds and professional walks of life. And similarly, with part-time MBA, we have students working for 67 unique employers across 21 different industries. So the same there, where students are coming from a variety of backgrounds, and that's really what's driving and underpinning the case method of those classes that the students are in this week and will continue to be in throughout the program.
Yeah, I think when we think about putting a class together, and sometimes we get asked by prospective students, what makes a strong candidate for these programs? What we're oftentimes thinking about is, the experiences someone has had as a professional, what they're going to bring to that conversation based upon their work experience, but also academically, what they've had a chance to learn about. To your point, there's no one right academic background, there's no one right professional background. We value having a lot of difference in the classroom because it's going to really enhance that classroom conversation. So we're very much building for the case method. But the other things that I'm always thinking about, when we're reading someone's application, trying to get to know them through the application process is what kind of classmate are they going to be? What kind of teammate are they going to be? How are they going to show up outside of the classroom as well? How are they going to engage with their classmates and what's their motivation here? Is it something deeper than just getting an MBA? I mean, certainly, the desire to have an MBA is important, but at Darden, because of the case method and how students are learning, you have to really be invested in the experience that you're having and really want to buy into that and be fully immersed in that to the extent you can be as a working professional student. And I think those are things that I think you see reflected in the people who are here now. When you talk to them about why they're here, you'll hear that as a pretty steady chorus. Like, I wanted to be challenged. I wanted to be in a room full of people who wanted to be active participants in their learning experience, and I wanted to be part of a community.
Exactly. I think what's also fascinating, particularly when you think about the differences in the classroom, is that as working professionals, these folks will be able to take what they've learned, not only from the cases themselves and the faculty, but from their peers, and take it back, learn from different industries, learn how different industries, different people in different roles are approaching different problems, and take that back to their work every single day, which is really, really neat too.
Yeah, it can be hard in your career to get outside of your particular industry, right? You're oftentimes surrounded by people who've worked in that industry for a while. And so you may be wondering, what about, how do people think about this in the aerospace industry or in consumer packaged goods or insert whatever industry here? And chances are 20 plus industries reflected in the executive MBA class and, typically somewhere in the neighborhood about 15 to 20 in a part-time MBA class, you will hear from a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. The other things that jumped out to me just a little bit about the class profile. Executive MBA average year's work experience is around 14 for this class, so
Sure.
a little bit north of last year's average, but still very much in line with a typical executive MBA class profile. Part-time MBA is around 6 years of work experience, which again is very typical for our part-time MBA classes. I noticed that in the executive MBA program, we had about 40+% of the students who had done a prior graduate degree, and our listeners may be surprised to hear that we have folks who've already done a graduate degree and they've now decided to go back to graduate school. But to me, when I think about the first graduate degree that many of our students have done, it's typically something that's much more specialized, much narrower in focus. And so they've gotten to a point in their career, though, where they see that there's a lot of value in doing a more general management MBA. They want to grow as leaders. Maybe they feel like they need more of a foundation in business. And so that's what's led them to Darden. But were you surprised by the percentage at all?
No, I actually wasn't. I think that's pretty typical for our students. Like you said, I think students get to a point in their career where they really see the value in the generalized approach of an MBA. And because of our generalized approach to the curriculum, it really allows them to see a broad range of topics that they can apply to their specific industry. And so it really lends itself to where folks are in their career, and allows them to kind of pair that specialized master's or whatever degree it was prior to us with the more broad degree to move forward in whatever their goals are professionally.
Yeah, it was fun. I was on the shuttle with the students this morning coming over to Darden, and I was asking them where they were going on their global residency because our executive MBA students have found out their global residency assignment. That's one of the things they find out about on the first day of school. And I think we had students going to Argentina, Germany, India, Finland, Estonia, just in the small group I was talking with. And that's another thing that they have to look forward to. And you talk about getting to know your classmates. That's a very special kind of bonding that happens on those global residencies.
Yeah, it's a really, again, launch week, an exciting time. New classmates, new classes, new program, and finding out where you're going on your global residency all in one week.
Yes, a lot of information coming your way if you're a brand new executive MBA or part-time MBA student. So it's also been fun to talk with the students. They ask us, well, you must get a break now, and there must be a lot of downtime for you now that the class has started. And we get to tell them, well, you know what? We're actually launching the application this week. So this is a
Exactly.
very exciting time of year. We're welcoming a new class of executive MBA and a new class of part-time MBA students, as well as our full-time MBA students. And we are also launching the new application for our executive MBA and part-time MBA programs all in the same week. So a very, very busy week. What do you enjoy about this time of year?
It's interesting. I think this time of year is a little bit bittersweet, right? So we are saying goodbye to the class we just recruited. They are now off to the races in the program, many of whom we've spent, 10, 11 months getting to know. But I think that so that's the sadder part. But the happier part is that we are now on to a new application cycle, and with a new cycle brings new prospective students. And so I really enjoy getting to know new prospective students. I enjoy hearing stories. I enjoy learning about their careers and how we can be helpful to them in our program. And then I particularly enjoy helping students get to and then through the application process itself, and then getting them to this moment here in the following year to launch week.
Yeah, I think people may not know. I mean, here at Darden, the admissions team really is with the students from the time when they're just learning and researching about the program to when they're working on their application, getting their application together and applying, to the evaluation and interview process, to the yield process, and even into the onboarding process. I mean, we were hosting a Start a School town hall along with our program team colleagues just a week ago. So, I mean, if you think about it, that's almost a 12-month journey for some of our applicants. For other applicants, obviously a more compressed timeline. But it's such a joy to be along for that ride. You really get to know people through the process. You get to, hear about the things that are happening in their lives and things that they're going to be juggling while they're trying to work their way through this program. And it's a real privilege. I always look forward to this time of year, not just because we have a new class of students, but also because we're going to have an opportunity to meet a whole another class of students. And every cycle is kind of its own thing. I know we say that to prospective students all the time, but I've been here for 10 years now, and I have yet to have one cycle that's exactly like another. There's always new externalities. Every class comes together in different ways. So it's kind of like a new thing every year.
Yeah, I look forward to what each cycle brings, both highs and lows. But most importantly, again, the students are what's at the center of it for me.
So Zoe, this is an exciting time of year. We have our first deadlines just on the horizon. For part-time MBA, the first deadline is September 8. For executive MBA, first deadline is September 10. Executive MBA, we typically will have monthly deadlines. For part-time MBA, we're doing something just a little bit different this year than what we did last year. Do you want to help people understand kind of our deadlines and application process?
Sure, yeah. So for Part-Time MBA, we are going to do something a little bit different this year. We will have monthly deadlines in the fall. So the first deadlines you shared will be in September, and they'll be every month until December. And then in the spring, we will continue to accept applications until June 1, with additional deadlines in February, March, and May. But what you should know is that all of our deadlines for both Executive MBA and Part-Time MBA operate like a discrete round within the larger cycle. And typically, candidates will learn of their application decision within 3 weeks of the application deadline. So um, we like to let folks know sooner rather than later. It's a pretty quick turnaround and a quick process for us in the professional degree programs. We want students to be able to have a decision, socialize that decision with the folks in their lives, their supervisors, their family, and because it can be a big undertaking to take on going back to school while also working full time. So we want people to have that information sooner rather than later. And then what people should also know is that all of our deadlines lead to an August start down here in Charlottesville. So the one question I get very frequently is, what round should I apply in? What is the best round to apply? And I always tell folks that you should apply in the round that you feel like you have the strongest, most complete application that best represents your candidacy. Our process is designed that we expect to meet compelling, competitive applicants through all of our deadlines and all of our rounds. But you should focus on the round that you feel like you can pull together the strongest application.
All good advice there. There's no one right time to apply. I always tell folks you don't want to rush an application just to apply early in our process. When we talk about a strong application, it's really an application that you feel confident in. When you press submit, you feel like you're giving yourself the best opportunity to be successful in the process. Executive MBA, we offer monthly deadlines. I mentioned this. It starts in September, and it's essentially the 10th of every month, rolling into kind of early June or so. And sometimes with Executive MBA, and it's also true with part-time MBA, we may stretch a little bit more into the summer months, depending on how things shape up with our class. I'd mentioned earlier that every class comes together a little bit differently. Just for context, for Executive MBA and part-time MBA this year, we continue to accept applications into June and July. Now, it's not to say that that will be the case in the coming cycle, but just I share that to note for folks, like every cycle is its own thing. This is our plan right now with the deadlines, and then we'll see how the classes come together. A lot of that has to do with how just working professionals think about the application process and application timing. Full-time MBA, I think if you look from program to program, it's pretty lockstep in terms of when the deadlines are and how they align across schools. However, when you start talking about working while pursuing your MBA, you may have different programs with different start dates, with different application deadlines as a result of that. And so we find that we meet great people in the fall, winter, spring, and even the summer. And so we try to create a deadline structure that, to Zoe's point, gets you feedback quickly, right? It's typically about 3 weeks from application deadline to decision release. Right? So you find out if Darden's going to be an option for you. And you'll typically have about 3 to 4 weeks to finalize your decision if you're extended an offer of admission. So we try to get you feedback quickly. But then we also try to offer multiple deadlines to give people, to take some stress off of the applicants. One, that if, as you're entering our process, that there's multiple dates to choose from, and that gives you some flexibility. We know people can sometimes get busy, and let's say you're really targeting that October deadline, and work happens, life happens, and you need to shift to a later deadline. That one is typically coming up around the corner. The other thing, as I mentioned, we meet great candidates all throughout the year, and so it's helpful to offer multiple deadlines stretching into the spring and even the summer, because we know that we'll meet folks who would be interested in joining us at Darden during that time as well. And so it's a kind of a different admissions process. I think oftentimes people are trying to anchor to undergrad, or if they've learned something about the full-time MBA. And I always tell folks, you got to accept this as kind of a slightly different thing. It's related, but it's its own thing.
I would encourage people also to just take a look at our deadlines page for each program. It's a great place to understand in detail our process, including the application deadline, and as well as the decision notification timeline and things of that nature. It's all listed there. I find it really helpful.
Yeah, and I think as an applicant, one of the things that I've always encouraged candidates to think about is like, even if you're going through the application process, let's say you're targeting the September 10 deadline, your executive MBA applicant, your research should still continue within that period when you've applied and you're going through. If you're invited to interview, you have an interview, like, you can still see the application process as part of the research process. I think sometimes people feel like they have to have everything figured out before they press submit on the application. From our standpoint, it is absolutely still part of the research and investigation process. The interview oftentimes can be a great way to learn more about the school in terms of the culture and sort of approach, but also, how folks are engaging with you through the application process. I think we try as an admissions team, to reflect out the sort of culture and values of the school. This is a very warm place. This is a relational place. This is a place where, students are very much individuals, and we want to get to know them. And we try to build that into our process, not just in terms of how we engage with prospective students, but also the application process. So I share all of that to say, like, you don't have to have every single thing figured out before you press submit. I think sometimes candidates, I don't know if that squares with your experience, Zoe, but that's certainly been my experience.
It's absolutely been my experience, and really just wanting to double click on the point of using the interview process or the interview conversation as part of your research, asking good questions of us as a program. Is this going to be a good fit for you, your career, your goals, and your life? Right, those are all really important things to consider.
All right, so we talked deadlines. Obviously, we've got slightly different deadline structure for part-time MBA. A few more opportunities for folks to apply. Executive MBA, it's the same sort of monthly approach that we've employed in the past. Anything you would want to highlight about the applications, either for executive MBA or part-time MBA, that's different this year, that's new this year?
Sure, yeah. So we have an exciting update to the Part-Time MBA application process. So our Part-Time MBA program is now test optional, which means a standardized test score is no longer required to apply. So in previous cycles, we had an opportunity for students to submit what's called a test waiver, where they could petition or submit an evidence-based argument that would suggest that they could prove academic readiness without a test score. In this cycle, you no longer have to go through a test waiver process. Candidates can make the decision whether to submit a test score or not. Students who choose not to submit a test score, we will consider your application just simply without one. But students who wish to submit a test score can, and we will absolutely still consider a test score should you choose to provide one. So we accept the GMAT focus, the executive assessment, the LSAT, the GRE, the MCAT, and all of those tests are considered equal. So again, you can submit a test score if you feel that it would support and prove academic readiness. But if you feel like you can prove academic readiness without a test score, we welcome your application without one.
Yeah, a few things to offer insights about that. So, for those of you who've been looking at our application process pages for a while, you may know that we made a similar change for executive MBA last year. So this past cycle for executive MBA was also test optional. We did not require standardized test score, and our experience with that was very very positive. We saw great candidates. I think found that candidates oftentimes were really being thoughtful about how they approach the application process and sort of thinking about, would a test score help you feel confident when you press submit? Would it help strengthen your overall application? I think a good place to start with that is kind of maybe doing a little bit of an audit and sort of thinking about, all right, from a degree standpoint, what's been the nature of my undergrad, or did I do a grad degree? What courses did I take? How did I do? How does my GPA compare to the average GPA for the program that I'm targeting? Do I have, any non-degree related coursework, Coursera, MBA math, that kind of thing? What about professional certifications? We oftentimes will see a number of students who have professional certifications. And then there's the nature of your work responsibilities, the nature of the roles, what you've been working on over the course of your career. And I think that can kind of create a data set for folks as they sort of think about, do I want to just apply on the basis of my existing background, or do I think a test score would be helpful? That's a pretty robust data set when you do that audit and you feel like you've got a lot of information there. Then maybe ultimately you decide maybe a test score is not necessary for me to feel confident. And then for other candidates, they may do that audit and they may say, you know what, I'd really like to have another factor here for the admissions committee to consider. And I will note there's a sort of broader strategic point for people to consider as they approach this question of, the admissions process is one thing. But we also have a scholarship process. And when you talk about the scholarship criteria, it includes things like GPA, graduate degree, standardized test score, some professional certification, CPA, CFA in particular. And then we also can consider exceptional work experience relative to the pool. So you can see there, having a standardized test score does give the scholarship committee one more thing to consider, but it's entirely possible to receive a scholarship without a test score. It's not required in our scholarship process either, but it can be, again, something that can be helpful to that committee. So that's how I encourage folks to think about it. And again, we're making this change for part-time MBA because we had this positive experience with executive MBA, and we felt like candidates were being thoughtful about it, and ultimately feel like we do see folks applying who have had a lot of different experiences, who have a fairly robust data set to share there. Maybe they've done grad school, maybe they have professional certifications, they've done additional non-degree related coursework, and so we're excited about this. And we always, we offer these one-on-one conversations, Zoe. And while we can't tell somebody what to do, I think this is a conversation that sometimes people will ask about. Sort of if they're on one of those calls, how could a test score be helpful? What do you think about this? Do you ever get that question from prospective students?
Yeah, I get that question pretty frequently, particularly with executive MBA candidates when we were test optional and continue to be test optional, but for last cycle. And I always encourage students to think broadly about the application and think about it as a narrative exercise. So, what story are you telling? And I think you have to take stock of the entirety of the application itself, because that's what we will do. We will consider all of the components equally when thinking about a candidate's candidacy, right? So like you said, in those one-on-one conversations, which is a wonderful time to sort of think through this process. We can't tell you one way or the other, right, based on the information that we have, but we are certainly happy to be a thought partner with you and help you kind of think through, if that's helpful, out loud, all of the other pieces that make up the component of the application. But ultimately, it is the decision of the applicant whether or not they choose to submit a test score.
Yeah, I would say just generally, our application is pretty similar to what it was last year. Sort of high level, what would we require? The application, as noted, a test score is not required for either part-time MBA or executive MBA. We will ask for a resume. We'll ask for transcripts for all degree-related coursework. We do have a few short answer questions. Those are largely the similar questions to what we asked last year. For those of you who've been following our application process closely, we do require one recommendation. We will accept up to two, but really one is all that's required. And we do have a preference, given that this is a working professional program, and we want to know that you're talking with people at work about your interest in pursuing an MBA here at Darden through one of our working professional programs. Ideally, we're hearing from your current supervisor, but the rule of thumb when it comes to choosing a recommender is someone who knows you well. And so, you want to use your best judgment as to who you think knows you well and can provide, insight about who you are professionally. That's really what we're looking for. And you might want to keep in mind when choosing a recommender, the questions that your recommender is asked. How do you know the applicant? How does the applicant compare to their peers? What's one piece of constructive feedback you've shared with the applicant? I think when you think about those questions, that can sometimes help you narrow down to maybe a few people. There's also a ratings grid where your recommender will rate you across a number of dimensions. And if you're curious about all of this, you can actually just do a Google for GMAC, that's GMAC, common letter of recommendation, and it'll give you a sense of what your recommender will be asked to do. So we do require one recommendation, and we've mentioned it a little bit here, but an interview is by invitation only in our executive MBA and parts of MBA processes, but an interview is necessary to receive an offer of admission. So if you're invited to interview, it does mean that you're being considered for an offer of admission. You should be excited about that. But you should also know that our interviews are conversational in nature. This is not going to be a behavioral interview. We may have a few questions that may feel a little bit more like a behavioral interview, but ultimately, this is a chance for you to tell your story, a chance for us to get to know you better, to get a feel for those things that may be harder to judge from the application alone, right? How do you talk about things? How do you communicate? How do you share your experiences? I think those are all things that we're interested in hearing more about. And I always encourage candidates to think about, like, the application is, the 30,000-foot view on who you are. The interview is a chance for you to really provide depth and to round out our understanding of not just what you've done, but what's led you to make the decisions that you've made. A key detail about our interview that you should know, in addition to it being conversational in nature, is that it's anonymous. So your interviewer will not have read your application, will also not have a copy of your resume in front of them. The reason for that is we really want the interviewer to come to this interaction without a lot of formed ideas about who the applicant is or their strength as a candidate. And so your interviewer is there to listen, to learn more about you, and they will write up the conversation, and that will become part of your application and ultimately be part of what the admissions committee reviews when finalizing their decision. So one of the things I like to share with candidates is, so we've already mentioned the timeline. So application deadlines and decision release is typically 3 weeks. In the midst of all of that, there's multiple reads of each application, different people looking at the application. There's committee review. We spend a lot of time with each application, and if you also add in the interview, like a lot of time with the applicant as well.
Yeah, we do. So each application receives about 4 rounds of review from the time that you submit the application all the way through to that final decision. And what I like to remind folks is that particularly when you think about these 4 rounds of review, that includes the conversation that you're having with your interviewer, is that if there is something in the application that you feel needs to be addressed, or if there's something that you feel is worth commenting on, maybe there was a dip in grades academically in your undergraduate or graduate degrees, or maybe at some point you were laid off from your job, or maybe at this very moment you have been laid off from your job and you're in the midst of a search. That is something that we want to know about. We will ultimately see it in the components of the application, in the transcript, on your resume, in the job history section. But there's another section in the application that gets read in these 4 rounds of review, and that is the additional comment section. And so that additional comment section is a fantastic place to just share additional context about something that you feel might be missing, or you feel has not been addressed. I always tell applicants to lean in to the places that they feel well, I want you to lean into your strengths first and foremost, right? Every applicant has strengths, and there is no such thing as a perfect application. But I also want you to address the things that might be weaknesses or places that you feel need additional explanation. And the additional comment section of the application is the best place to do that. I mentioned that in the context of having 4 rounds of review, is that in these rounds, we will certainly notice these things. And so allow yourself to provide an explanation, allow yourself to provide context rather than us trying to put the pieces together. We read these applications in its entirety. We read them as, like I said, it's a storytelling exercise. We're trying to understand your story. And so providing as much context to that story is always better than not.
Yeah, I appreciate that note. I think oftentimes we may run into candidates who are reluctant to talk about losing a job, or maybe they're searching for a role and they're not sure how to explain that. Let's just go ahead and say this on this podcast. I think we've heard probably about every story we can at this point, and we know that life happens, things happen, people do lose jobs. There's a lot happening in the world right now. As an applicant, it's way better to be upfront about that sort of thing, to be able to talk about it, to explain it, to be able to share, sort of what happened and what's going on, and where are you in the process of finding your next thing. As mentioned, part-time MBA, executive MBA, or working professional programs, we're going to be listening for, okay, where are you now, and what are you, what are you thinking about what you'd like to do next? Where are you in that process? But it's way better to be upfront about it and to be transparent about it, because you have an opportunity to explain. And we are real people, right? We are in this business because we enjoy getting to know students. We enjoy helping students. We enjoy helping people figure out if Darden is the right place for them. And so, just really encourage you to kind of bring that transparency to the application process. I find that's the best approach. The other thing I think about a lot, Zoe, is as people are approaching the application, there's one way of approaching the application of like opening an application, just filling it out and pressing submit. But I think the best applications, people, again, sort of getting back to this question of like, what makes a strong application? It's typically the product of a lot of thought, introspection, reflection. To your point, what story do you want to tell through the application? And we encourage folks to think about this kind of like a three-legged stool, or kind of 3 pillars of the application. There's the personal, the academic, and the professional. Invariably, people discount the personal and they think it's not as relevant. It absolutely is relevant. And if you sort of think about this metaphor of the stool, for the application to be sort of strong, to be able to stand on its own, the stool to be able to stand, all of these elements need to be represented there. And so as you are approaching the application process, just open the application, just read through it, just see what's required, what questions are answered. And then after doing that, take some time to just write out the list of things. Like at the end of reading this application, what do you want the admissions committee to know about you? Like if you're thinking about this as an initial introduction to who you are, what's most important for you to convey? And once you get that list, you then want to go back to the application and start thinking about how the various elements of the application, how they can help you advance those priorities to tell that story that you want to tell. And remember, if you're invited to interview, you also have the interview as a way to sort of bring more depth to that story. But I think that makes for a really thoughtful application, because you can see how candidates are leveraging these parts of the application to tell a very intentional story, and kind of really thinking about, this is what I want people to know about me. This is the stuff that's really important to me.
Exactly. And I'll just add that I think most applications sort of really have a lot of strengths in the academic and the professional. People really lean on those 2 pillars and are very comfortable in that space. The personal is what we're also equally interested in. So I always just encourage folks not to forget about the personal, and really think carefully about how to intertwine the personal into some of those short answer questions, as well as on your resume. Unlike a job resume, we are particularly interested in things like countries traveled or languages spoken or hobbies. That is something that we encourage you to think about adding to your resume. We're not particular sticklers on resume length or format here at Darden. We want you to submit the resume we feel is the best representation of you and the impact in the roles that you've held. But that being said, really think about maybe there's a space on that resume to infuse some of the personal as well.
I love that. And we actually wrote a few sentences in advance of like the sort of what's called the teammates or classmates question in our application, just sort of connecting the personal, who you are as a person to the learning experience here at Darden. It's maybe not a huge stretch. It's, case method. It's interactive. Your personal experiences, what you're passionate about, your interests, all these kinds of things, they come with you to the classroom here at Darden. And so the pedagogy is sort of bound up with what you've seen and experienced and what you're passionate about. And so that we're interested in that. But of course, we talked about the sense of community, which is absolutely a hallmark of our professional degree programs. I think sometimes people feel like, well, if I'm going to do a working professional program, I'm going to have to give up on that whole community thing. That's not the case here at Darden. And I think so a great way to sort of experience that firsthand is to come for a class visit. I think we talk about that as maybe being one of the most high impact things a student can do. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I always joke that I describe the case method for a living, and yet I seem to fall short in just describing it. In the sense that I really think it's one of those things you have to be in the classroom to experience and to really grasp and understand that type of learning. And so we offer class visits and we offer part-time MBA class visits a couple nights a month, and then we offer executive MBA class visits usually about once a month. You can find the listings for those on our event section for each program. But I always encourage students to come to a class visit, sit in the classroom with the students. It's a really wonderful opportunity to be a fly on the wall. We don't ask you to prepare a case. We don't ask you to do any homework for that class. You can just sit and sort of observe how the case method works, understand how what we really mean by student-led participatory learning, how the faculty are facilitating a conversation as opposed to lecturing. And it's a really wonderful opportunity to really see if this is number one, the right fit for you and your learning style. And it's really, I think, the best way to learn more about our programs here at Darden.
Well, any final words of advice for our prospective students, our listeners today?
So much advice, but I think first and foremost, I would, if I would continue to get to know us as a program. We have so many opportunities, class visits, as I mentioned. We have an opportunity for you all to connect with a member of our team one-on-one. I think that's a wonderful place to start. It's a 25-minute conversation, and it's really the time is yours to learn, to get your questions answered, to talk about things on your resume. We could talk about application questions. Happy to be a thought partner around whether to submit a test score or to not, that sort of thing. But that's a wonderful kind of low stakes way to start. In addition to, we offer several webinars throughout the month, overviews of both the executive and part-time MBA programs, as well as application tips webinars as we get closer to application deadlines, and those will go on throughout the year. And so there's plenty of opportunity to connect with us. I strongly recommend taking us up on this offer. We really enjoy getting to know candidates. We enjoy working one-on-one with candidates, and we really feel like there is no question that is too small. So please reach out to us. Please take us up on our offer, and best of luck in the next cycle.
Yeah, so much good advice there. I'll mention one other thing. So we now have a Connect with a Student form, Connect with a Current Student form. This is something we introduced kind of in the spring of last year, and we already have 70, 80 plus submissions for it. We absolutely welcome and encourage that. If you want to speak to a member of our community, um, connect with a current student, either our part-time MBA or executive MBA programs, we'd be happy to facilitate that introduction. So if I would just plug that because I think that's something that we've seen a lot of success with. And, as much as Zoe and I are helpful, I think sometimes people want to get straight to the source, people who are living and experiencing this on a day-to-day basis. And that's one of the reasons why we introduced that form. So I'll just mention that. And so the last thing is, this is, like I said, a very exciting time of the year. When I think about August, app launch week, we have 0 students in our executive MBA class, 0 students in our part-time MBA class. And yet, as we go from deadline to deadline, the class will start to take shape. They will eventually start to get maybe sort of critical mass to start to get a sense of a little bit of the personality of the class. So, this is a time of year where everything's possible. Who knows what this class is going to be like? Who knows what the cycle is going to be like? And so we're really excited to get to meet the students who are going to be part of the, I want to make sure I get this right, the executive MBA class of 2028 and the part-time MBA class of 2029. It sounds so futuristic, but yet that's
So
where we are.
futuristic, but I'm excited.
Well, Zoe, thanks for your time. It's great catching up with you as always.
Thank you, Brett.
That was my conversation with Zoe Mayfield Boykin, a member of our professional degree program admissions team here at the Darden School of Business. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's EXEC, MBA at darden.virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.